So it's a holiday weekend, and it's really cold outside. There were all sorts of reasons not to show up today, and you are here. And I believe that you made the sacrifice of walking through the cold and not going out of town, at least including this morning, because there's something about showing up to worship on a Sunday morning that you just can't go without. You just can't, in some cases, even live without. Some of you, I think, are here because you were here maybe even last week, and you heard us talking out of Mark chapter 8 about what does it take to see the Lord. Many of you started this new year and you go, I want to see him again. Some of you said, I've never seen him before. I've been blind to this thing my whole life, and I've been waiting for someone to open my eyes, to make Jesus the kind of person, to make the faith, the following of him, something that I would deeply desire so that I could experience what it appears the people around me who have made that decision are experiencing. Last week we were in Mark chapter 8, and it was one of those rare and random miracles where Jesus heals a person, but it takes a second touch. If you were here, you may remember that there was this blind man that a crowd brought to him, and the crowd brought and said, hey, will you lay your hands on him? And he says, absolutely. We don't know if the people knew the guy or not. Maybe they just wanted to see a miracle. They had heard of other miracles. And so they bring him. He lays his hand on him. He touches him. And then you remember what he did next? He spit. He spit on the guy. And he said, I heal you. What do you see? He says, well, I see like people or trees or something kind of walking around. It's not real clear. And we talked last week a little bit about some of us once had our eyes open and our vision is starting to fail on us. Or we kind of had an idea of who Jesus was, but we need someone to clear it up a little bit. Give us a clearer, finer view of this person, Jesus. So good news for you in Mark chapter 8, when the guy could only see sort of faint images of people or trees walking around, Jesus touched him again. And in that moment, he was able to see fully. And last week, we talked about what does it mean to make room to see God? What does it mean to make room to uncover what he's doing, where he's going, to be able to see the person that we've committed ourselves to following? It requires vision. And this week, we are moving forward a little bit to talk about how do we now, if we can see him, how do we make room for the call of God? How do we make room to hear him as he leads us, as he guides us? And interestingly enough, if you, in my Bible at least, if you stay on the very same page, the last story in Mark chapter 7 gives us an idea how that goes. So if you found Mark 8 already, it's probably the same page. If you haven't yet, you can look there at Mark 7 if you'd like. But in this moment, we don't have Jesus healing a blind person. We have Jesus healing a deaf and mute person, a person who can't hear and can barely speak. It happens right there in chapter 7. Starting in verse 31, this is where we pick up on this story. Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. There, some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit, touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, what did he say, Cabe? Ephphatha. I was counting on him to pronounce the old words best. Ephphatha, and it means be opened. Why didn't they just put that in here for us? Be opened. At this, the man's ears were opened. His tongue was loosened. He began to speak plainly. And then Jesus commands them, don't tell anyone. But the more he told them that, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. He has done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. They cannot keep quiet. Now, if you were here last week, this story sounds a lot like the one we heard last week. A crowd of people bring a person in need of healing. Do they know him or not? We don't know. They want to see a miracle. Is that why they're bringing him? Maybe so. But they bring this person to Jesus. They say, Jesus, will you touch him? Same thing as last week. Will you touch him? And just like last week, Jesus takes the person who's in need of healing away from the crowd. And once again, uses spit. What's up with this? He says be open. He heals the guy. And then in this story, a little bit unlike the other one, when the guy comes back, able to speak, able to hear, the people are like in awe and amazement, and they just can't stop talking about the power of Jesus in this moment. And the more, it says here, that the more that Jesus said, hey, y'all be quiet. Everybody's gonna, remember last week I talked about the thing called the Messianic secret? Jesus was trying to keep himself kind of low key on the DL until the right time. So they keep talking about it. They get louder. He's like, stop. And the more he says stop, the more they keep doing it. Sounds like parenting. Stop. And they just keep on doing it. And I have to admit that when I was reading this week, I thought, man, wouldn't it be awesome if at the end of every sermon I said, hey, y'all don't tell nobody what you learned today. If that, maybe that's the new tactic. Like, hey, keep it to yourself. And you'll run and you won't be able to stop talking about it. Right now, it seems like I say, hey, let's go tell everybody about it. And you go, let's just keep that to ourselves. Don't really want to embarrass myself at the office or on the golf course or anywhere else that my friends who don't believe might be beneficial from hearing. There's something about when you hear good news, you just got to tell it. But first, you got to hear it, right? You may remember, some of you, that a couple months ago, the week after my 50th birthday, I was longing to hear from the Lord. I wanted my ears to be open to hear something new, something fresh. As I'm saying, I was starting my 50th year. My marriage is finishing its 25th year. Our campus is moving into its 10th year as of last week. It just seems like this moment is kind of a milestone moment. All these things are kind of happening right now. And I wanted to make sure that the rest of my life is lived with even more focus than the first half. And so I went on this retreat. Many of you remember me telling this. I decided I was going to go and spend a week away from all of you, away from my wife and kids. And I was going to catch up with a couple friends of mine who have spoken the word of God into my life over my lifetime. In advance, I told them, hey, I'm going to come spend some time with you. And at the end of my trip, I'm going to come spend some time with you. And I'd love for you to be praying even now for what the Lord might have for me that you need to tell me. Can you be praying in advance of my visit so that when I get there, you'll be able to give me a word from the Lord? And I went, and my first stop was with a guy named JD, a good buddy of mine, and he offered a word for me. His word for me was, you're asking Jesus to lead the way, and Jesus is saying to you, he is the way. In many ways, it's like, Brent, you're asking Jesus to either point out the way and say, hey, here we go, that's where we're headed, like point the way, or you want Jesus to run and get to the destination and call you to it. But Brent, in this season of life, he's inviting you to remember he's walking with you. And he's not going to point it out in advance, and he's not going to run ahead and call you to it. You just have to trust him every day. Walk with him. Wake up every morning, look to the east, the eastern star will rise. That was his language. And so in the mornings, I take my dog on a walk, and I watch the sun come up over the trees. And I ask the Lord, where are we going today? Because that's all he wants to give me at this moment. I spent several days in quiet and silence. I'd walk these trails at this monastic retreat center. And on one of those occasions, I was walking with no one there to speak to me but the Lord. And the Lord said this to me, Parker, with the rest of your life, just make sure they know that I love them. Just make sure they know that I love them. And at first I heard it as, make sure the people in your life know that you love them, Brent. And he goes, nope, that's not it. You can through your love, but make sure that everybody you meet for the rest of your life knows that I love them. That was a word I received from the Lord. As I got to the end of my trip, I stopped with a friend of mine named David Emery. He was the first pastor to take a chance on me. I was a youth pastor in the late 90s in the Woodlands, and little church, and this pastor gave me a chance. I moved right on out of bartending and coaching basketball straight into being a youth pastor. Perfect transition. Perfect. There's a lot of similarities, actually. But this guy took a chance on me. And because of the chance he took on me, I ended up meeting my wife and having a child and feeling confirmed in my call to ministry. It led me into eventually seminary and to the rest of the churches that I've been at, even this one. And when I was with him, I was not lamenting, but just acknowledging that I feel like at 50, I've got more room in the rear view than I do in the windshield. And I feel like I got less life ahead of me than I had behind me. I just want to make what I have left count. And he said this peculiar word to me. He said, Brent, using sort of financial terms, he says, Brent, the deposits that you make in your future will be like compounding interest. He says your time may be shorter, but the compounding of the interest of where you've been, the seeds you've planted in the past, they're going to bear more fruit going forward than they ever bared in the past. And that's good news for those of us in the room who feel like we have less years, less quantity ahead, that maybe I actually have more life ahead of me than the life I've lived behind me. Now, interestingly enough, I'm still thinking about this. I'm still letting that guide me. I'm still asking the Lord to make even more clarity out of what I heard from those two guys and from the Lord, just from him. And this guy, David, as I've been reflecting on this, I thought back, David, as relates to our relationship, David was instrumental in that one too. That same pastor who tells me that the seeds I've planted in my past will bear greater witness in the future, that my impact on the world will be like compounding interest going forward. He's the one 10 years ago when I was at First Christian Church of Longview as an associate pastor, happily serving that congregation, my family happy in that community. Started to get this little wrestling in me. God, what are you doing in me? And what you're doing in me, is this where I'm supposed to live it out? And I was a little confused. I wasn't sure. Am I supposed to stay in Longview? Am I supposed to be going somewhere else? I don't know. And so I called him 10 years ago, and more than 10 now. I said, hey, David, when you left us in the Woodlands to go to Kentucky, how did you know? How did you know it was time? And he said, Brent, here's what I've learned over the years. You have to be able to ask yourself a simple question. What is it? He says, I need you to ask yourself the question, am I being a good steward of my own life? I said, say more, Dave. He says, well, are you being a good steward of your life? This one life you've been given, this one little moment in all of eternity, the gifts that you've been given, the resources you've been given, the people who have been given, are you stewarding all of that? Are you stewarding it well in your the way you're living? And I sensed in response to that question that when I was in Longview, I don't think I am. I think there's a lot more in me, God, that you're calling me to put out into the world. And it was because of that question, him prompting it and me answering it and the Lord fulfilling it, that I ended up here today. So in many ways, you can either thank or be upset with Dave. I'll give you his number. You can let him know how you feel about that. But I guess that's just a word of caution, that if you ask the Lord, am I being a good steward of my life, he will answer you. And in some cases, it may require you to make a change in vocation, a change in location, a change in the way that you steward all parts of your life, the way you steward your time, the way you steward your money and resources. And so this morning, I want to talk about hearing from the Lord. If we hear from the Lord, are we really willing to, ask, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. And then if we hear him, are we really willing to respond? And I'd like to suggest that you came this morning because last week you came wanting to see more and you left maybe with better vision. And this morning you came wanting to hear better. I'm just going to make that presumption of all of us today. So Jesus makes this challenge to us. He made the same challenge back in the first century to the people who were following him there. Are you really ready to follow me? Do you want to be called by me? We're always talking about our calling. What are we called to? I think it's simple. Follow me. That was Jesus' call to everybody. Follow me. Well, what should I do and how should I do it? Just follow me. And to some people, he didn't come quite direct. In fact, there's a story in Matthew chapter 13 that used to always confuse me a little bit. Jesus is just told this parable of the sower planting seeds and such, and the disciples are like, hey, Jesus, why are you always using parables? Why don't you just shoot people straight? You're telling these stories that people have to kind of figure it out. You're being too gentle, maybe. And this is what Jesus said in response. He says, I teach in parables because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, they've been given to you, not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they'll have an abundance, and whoever does not have, what they have will be taken from them. And this is why I speak in parables. Verse 13. Because though seeing, they do not see, though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, that you will be ever hearing but never understanding. You'll be ever seeing but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become callous. They hardly hear with their ears. They've closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. And he looked back at them, he says, but blessed are your eyes because they see, your ears because they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and longed to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. In this little text, I found myself thinking, am I, people who are best described by Isaiah, we have ears, we just don't hear. We have eyes, we just don't see. And maybe it's because we don't want to. Maybe we come on Sundays and we hear the word of God, but we really don't want to hear the word of God. Like hear it in a way that it changes us, hear it in the way that it convicts us, hear it in a way that it takes our divided mind and divided heart and leads us to follow Jesus instead of the others that we hear guiding us. Or do we want to be blessed, as it says in verse 16, that we have eyes that do see and ears that do hear? I was convicted that if I want to have eyes to see and ears to hear, if I'm willing to let the word of God just be simply instructive to me to say something that I will follow, then let me just remember some of the things that the word has said to me. Here's something it said in the 24th Psalm, the one right after the one many of us have memorized. Psalm 24 begins with, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. Wait a second, this all belongs to you? Sounds like what Swayze was saying. Do I really want to hear that? Do I really want to believe that? That everything I thought I owned, I don't own? Everything I thought I made, that I thought I created, that I wanted a high five for and a badge of honor for, I had actually very little to do with that. It was the grace of God that did all that and made all that. Do I want to hear that? Do I want to hear what the Apostle Paul said to the church in Rome in the 12th chapter where he said, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual, true, and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, this good, pleasing, and perfect will. Do I really want to hear those words and find them to be true? Do I want to believe that what the Lord wants from me in response to the fact that he made me and everything I got and gave it all to me as grace? Do I want to believe that I'm really called to lay myself down, offer myself as a sacrifice in response to him and to the people around me? Like, am I really going to give my time and then in verse 2, my mind to the ways of God and instead of the ways of the world? Do I really want to know God's will? Because it sounds like that's what it takes to hear his call and to know his will. Then we go back to an Old Testament text. I taught on this on a Tuesday morning recently. It's one that many of us have. It's a little verse that we have them on little signs in our houses, most of the time out our front door, just inside the front. Maybe you're remembering this out of Joshua chapter 24. It's a moment when Joshua's got the people, he's leading them into the promised land, and he stops and he says, now people, let's be really clear about what's going to be expected here. We're moving into this new place, but I want to ask you. He says, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness and throw away the gods your ancestors worshiped beyond the Euphrates River and back in Egypt and serve the Lord. He says, but if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day, today, whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served back on the other side of the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites who are here in this land where you live now. And then he said, but as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. I mean, these are convicting words straight from the word of God. Do we want to hear this? Do we want to respond to this? Do we want to hear what God's calling us to? Now that we have ears that are open, we are no longer deaf or hardly able to speak. We're now hearing clearly if we showed up with ears to hear, not those ears like the folks that Isaiah is talking about, ears and not hear, but the blessed folks Jesus talked about, we came to hear. Can we hear this? I mean, let's be honest, Jesus, when he's talking directly to people, sometimes he doesn't do the parable thing. Sometimes he's just direct. And it's hard. It feels like he's stepping on their toes. Do you remember the direct moment where he says, you want to follow me? Well, then leave your family behind. Even to the person who said, can I just go bury my father? He's, look, let the dead bury their own dead. Come and follow me. Put nothing ahead of me on your schedule. You want to follow me? Leave it all behind. Come to me. To another place around finances, he says, Look, man, if you want to follow me, if you're serious about following me, go sell everything you have. Go sell it all and give it all to the poor, and then you'll be ready to follow me. And I hear both of those things, and I'm like, Jesus, I proclaim I love you more than I love my wife, but man, I have to leave her to follow you? I'm going to put you ahead of her? How's she going to like that? What I'm finding is that my wife and my kids love it when they know they're second to Jesus. Because what they find is what they get from me is what I've gotten from him. It actually ends up working out just fine. I don't have a parable for you, but I do have this visual. If you've been around, you know that we created this visual on week 1 where we basically said this sand is the stuff that doesn't matter much. The rocks are the things that matter the most. And if we put all the sand in first and then try to put in rocks, there's actually rocks hidden in here. There's not room for what's most important. This whole visual was to try to remind us that you have to take stock of what's most important in your life. You put those things into your life first, and then you pour the lesser things in, and there's room for both. But if you put the lesser things in first and then try to pile what matters in, you end up with it overflowing and not enough room. Seems like for me, when I'm not paying attention, and maybe you, when you're not paying attention, we find ourselves living lives where we look at our faith and we look at our life in the church and we go, I just don't know if I have any time left to do that. I don't know if I have any money left to give that. But I look around and I see there are actually folks who figured it out. Folks in this room who can take what I'm saying and make it less theory and much less pie in the sky thinking like, yeah, nobody could ever do that. No one could ever do this, Pastor. Problem is, I look around this room and I see people who have. I see people who have done it since day one of our church. You know, I don't get to see many of how you all live your lives out and about because I'm not really on social media a whole lot, and that's where most of us tell what we're doing in our lives. But what I do see around here and what I do see limited in the way you live your lives outside of Sundays, here's what I've noticed. I am surrounded by people who give their time away. They give their time away to people other than themselves. They find ways in their calendar to identify where can I love and serve others? Where can I serve the church? Where can I serve the local community before I worry about taking care of myself? And you're all over the room. In fact, I made a list and it took 2 rows on this sticky note of just what I can think of the people who are serving in this place. I'm not gonna name names because that's when you start getting in trouble, but I'm gonna name the things that y'all do. And when I name the thing that you are doing or have done, would you please be so kind to your pastor to just stand up quickly so that all of us, I and the rest of us can see how volunteerism is alive and well in the room? If you are on a serve team in the life of our church, that means you're at a door, you're handing out a bulletin, you're at the donuts. Would you stand up where you are? If you were back in the day setting up and taking down pipe and drape, stand up where you are. I'm gonna call you out because I know some of you do that. See this? You people showing up back in the school at 6:30 in the morning to empty out trailers, to get everything in, to only pack them back in if you were on a serve team. Some of you work in children's ministry. If you're not back there today, but you serve our children, stand up where you are. If you're on a children's team, come on now. I'll call you out. I'll call you out. Children's ministry team. Children's ministry doesn't happen without you. We got our student ministry, folks who volunteer in our student ministry or serve our students. You're in the room. Stand where you are. If you lead, if you're a fellow student leader, if you're an adult who does those things. I know most of them come at 11 when the students come because they all like to sleep in. Women's ministry. There are many of you in the room who are leading a Bible study, who are leading one of the special events in the life of our church. You need to be known. You need to be recognized. Men's. There's a guy, Jerry, right here who's leading a growing men's Bible study. Jerry, stand up. If you're in men's ministry, we got men's leaders who lead at a table. We got guys who show up early to make coffee for the men. We got a guy who drives from the Woodlands. He's not here today. He drives from the Woodlands, picks up donuts on his way for the guys on Tuesday mornings. These are all volunteer jobs. They don't get paid anything for this. We have senior adults in this room who make sure there's a lunch bunch. I saw y'all back there, Rives. Stand where you are. We got senior adults who are planning game nights and making sure that all of our senior adults have plenty of things going on. We have a prayer team. You on the prayer team? Stand where you are, prayer team people. Y'all are so shy. Stand up. This is the church. This is who we are. If you're on the care team, stand up with them. If you're a care leader, stand up with those people. Look at this. These are the people who help Pam and I and the rest of the staff meet the needs of folks who are going through hard times and hard things. This is y'all. We have a craft circle. You in the craft circle? Stand up, craft circle. These are the people who come up here year-round making crafts so they can sell them to us and to our community, all with 100% of it going right back out to missions. The craft circle. We got Emmaus leadership. Jerry is a part of that Emmaus leadership. We got a meal team. Many of you have cooked meals for those who were in need. They had a surgery or a sickness that required them to have meals brought in, and we've got folks who are guiding that. We have folks who pick up laundry during the week. Is there a laundry person in the room? You just put your hand in the air so we can see you. Look at you. Thank you. We have clean tablecloths underneath the coffee creamers because of her. And because of others who do that for us. There's nothing too big or small. Christmas setup, the tree that got put up, the decorations that got put up, the decorations in here, you think that just shows up? Volunteers did all that. Volunteers did all of that. You get served communion by volunteers. The communion gets set up and cleaned up by volunteers. We have a counting team. You never see them. But there's 3 people every single Sunday who stay after worship while we all run off to lunch, and they're counting the morning's offering so that it can be accurate, put it in the safe so that we can get it to the finance team on the other campus over on Lake Woodlands. They never get thanked, but I thank them. We got some guys with a facilities team. Andrew Temple leads that team. We got a guy that comes every single night to make sure this building got locked up. That if there's lights out, that it gets identified. If there's running water, if there's a potential harm to our campus, they're checking it out, they're looking it out. We got local missions. Many of you are supporting God's Garage that we're focused on right now. Many of you are involved in other local missions, Habitat for Humanity and Kids Meals and the rest. Steward support. We have a group of folks who go over here and on every single payday push a cart around giving breakfast to the teachers. It's our payday breakfast at Stewart Elementary School every single month. All volunteers. All volunteers. And then there's the good old donut team. I mean, come on, they might be your favorite. I'm on Whole30, so they're not my favorite right now. But when I get off this thing, I'll be eating donuts again. This is our church. This is our church. This is the generosity of the way that you've dedicated your time. And if you're a church member and you didn't stand at all, not because you were embarrassed to stand, but because you're not currently serving somewhere, this is just a reminder that what we re-up every year is, hey, if I'm a member, one of my vows is to serve. This is just a subtle reminder, or maybe a very direct one. I'm not speaking in parables. If you're a member of the church, you should be volunteering somewhere. You said you wanted to. That's when you joined. I told you don't join until you're ready to. And you joined anyway. So we know who you are. But I'd much rather focus on all the ones who are volunteering because there's more of us who are doing that than not. It's the only reason our church is healthy and growing. And there's people who have prioritized the way that they use their money. Today is our Pledge Card Sunday, and so many of you in the room, if you're not members of our church, this isn't necessarily for you. It's when the members of the church just want to focus in on our ears. One of the vows that we took when we were joining the church too was that we would be financially invested in this church that we love. And we want to pledge whatever the Lord leads us to pledge so that the budget in the upcoming year can be met. So that the ministries that have benefited us and we see benefiting the people around us, so that those things can continue. And so today is Pledge Card Sunday, and during the last song that we'll sing here in just a moment, we'll invite you to bring your pledge card up. Just as I mentioned with the volunteerism, I'm not gonna have people stand up about giving. If you're giving, you can stand up. I'm not gonna do that. I don't know what you give. I don't know how much you give. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. Differing opinions on that. But I don't know. Here's what I do know. Year after year since day one at the school, you have been faithful and generous in your financial giving. We've had money in the bank every single year for the last 9 years. We've never had to say no to a ministry because we couldn't fund it. We've always been able to say yes. God has always provided everything we need to accomplish everything he calls us to. And it's because of you. And I want to thank you for that. Because each and every one of you is making some amount of sacrifice. The widow with one coin or the one giving all they have. All of you are making some level of sacrifice to keep your commitments to the financial needs of the church. And I'm super, super grateful for that. Some of us in the room, we have an ongoing pledge. It comes out of our bank. That's what I do. Some of us, if you're in that boat, what you'll want to do is you'll want to take your pledge card and you just want to write, keep it up. Keep what I've been doing the same. That's what I want to do again this year. Others of you are going to say, man, Lord, I don't know what to give this year. I don't know if I should give more or give less, but Lord, I want to give as much as I can until the smile falls off my face because I know how much you love a cheerful giver. I just want to give. If that's you, you don't really know what you want to give, you just know you want to, then on your card, just write your name. Don't write any numbers down. And take your card with you and keep praying over it over the week. And you can turn it in next week, or you can go online and you can make your pledge that way. But the bottom line is this: if you have an ongoing giving, you still need to fill out a pledge card so we know that it's going to continue. And since we're family, here's what I'd love to see this morning. I'd love for you to take your pledge card. I'd love for you to decide what you're going to write on it, whether you're just going to write your name on it on the back, put it in an envelope and bring it, or whether you're going to write down what you're giving for the year ahead and put that in the envelope and give it, or just write your name and maybe keep it the same on the back, whatever, however you're going to respond. I want to ask that every single member of our church today puts a card in an envelope and comes to the front and lays it here on this platform as your own way of saying, I'm going to continue to try to put the Lord first in my life. I'm going to do everything I can to try to remember that everything I have is His. That means my calendar. That means my resources. I'm going to do everything I can to remind myself that it's His. And I'm going to do everything I can with the Lord's help to respond accordingly. So I want to ask as we get into our final song that you would do that for me. More, that you would do it for the Lord. Re-acknowledge for Him that you're in. You're here. Lord, do what you will with me. Okay? And if everybody's doing it, then no one will be embarrassed by it. How about that? Let me offer a word of prayer as we wrap our time together. God, within us is a life that we did not create. Within us is breath that we did not create. You created breath and life, and you give it to us as a gift. You give it to us every morning. Your word says that your mercies are made new every day, and I believe that my life is a mercy. The fact that this morning I got to wake up and roll over and see my beautiful wife, that I got to spend this past weekend with my beautiful boys, those are all gifts you've given me. Just things I didn't ask for, things you provided. I think about the fact that I have a roof over my head. I think about the fact that even on an eating plan, a cleansing, that there's still plenty of food that I can eat. I have choices. I walk into this room and I'm surrounded by people who love me, who know me, and even in knowing me, they still love me. These are all gifts of your grace. I recognize what's in my pocket, what's in my bank account, that's all yours too. That my calendar and how I spend my time it's all yours, it's time you gave me. And so this morning, God, I just want to offer to you again my life. I want to ask you to do with me, with my time, as you would see fit. I want you to be the priority of my life. I want that to show up in how I spend my time and how I spend my money. You don't want either of those things if I'm going to be begrudging and giving it to you. You don't need it. But you love it when I smile as I give it to you. That with joyfulness and cheerful heart, I give my time and my resources back to you, Lord, today. And now this morning, I invite my brothers and sisters of our church, those who are in our church family, those who have felt convinced that this is the place you've called them, and these are the people to whom you've called, and we just want to work together to see your will accomplished in our community. God, would you give us a sign, help us to hear what you're leading us towards. And help us to be faithful. Help us to be courageous. Help us to be generous. God, be with us as we take our steps here to the altar, to re-up, to tell you that we are yours. Do that now, God, in Jesus' name. Amen.